Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 8th of September, 2019. And in this session, we're going to talk a little bit about lessons I have learned, kind of in my first steps in the journey in recording acoustic music. In this particular case, we're using something that Rode sent me. So Rode recently came out with a new set of microphones made specifically for recording acoustic music, and I think in particular classical music or Western art music. And those are called the TF-5, and they come in a matched pair. The TF stands for Tony Faulkner. Tony Faulkner is a legendary recording engineer. Most of his credits are for classical musical recordings and things of that nature. So he advised Rode on the design of the TF-5 microphones, which we used here. Now, I don't have a ton of experience recording music, and so for me, this is a kind of a new thing. So I'm not here to preach to you how this is done. For me, this is going to be a bit of a learning experience, and I will tell you a little bit about some of the lessons I learned here. So when I was in Boise last visiting my brother and the rest of my family, Carrie was able to arrange to bring in a harp player named Riley Johnson, and she plays in sort of experimental type music, I would say, but she also plays harp. And what we did is we set it up at his studio, and there are kind of a few lessons learned there. I think the biggest lesson learned was mic position matters a lot. So I did quite a bit of research before we did the recording session just to kind of try and get some ideas on how to mic up a harp, and because this was my first time doing it, really. I did it once live for a live situation, and when you're doing it live, it may be a little bit different because what you're trying to do is reinforce the sound there. And so you will do a little bit more kind of close miking. In this particular case, though, based on the research I did, a lot of people suggested that depending on the sound you're trying to go for, oftentimes close miking is not what you want if you want a more naturalistic sound. So you really need to think of it in terms of, for this particular sound, now you can close mic a harp, and that's legitimate as well, just a different sound. But what we were going through it for is more of a naturalistic sound. So in those cases, the research basically suggested that kind of treat the harp and the room as the overall instrument and experiment with where you place the microphones. Try not to get too close because there's a sort of a sound chamber at the bottom of the harp, which can start to sound pretty boomy if you close mic that. And so most of the things I read suggested moving back a fair bit. And so we ended up with the microphones probably 4 feet away from the harp, and just in a regular stereo pair with the tips of the microphones kind of at about a 90 to 120 degree angle facing the harp. So that's what we did. And I'll play a couple of samples for you here in just a minute. One of the things that really kind of was a dumb mistake that I made here, and you may be able to hear it. Actually, you will be able to hear it, I'm sure. And I'm not going to play the recordings where it was even worse. A lot of this cinema camera and lighting equipment have fans in them, and the fans interfere when you're recording sound, and especially when you're doing this type of miking technique where you're not super close miking. So that is one of the first lessons we learned. Is we had an Aperture 300D, the original version, which has a rather noisy fan in it in the head. It also has one in the power brick, the AC adapter. We had an Ursa Mini Pro. We had 2 Pocket Cinema 4K cameras. The Pocket Cinema 4Ks do have a fan in them, but they're pretty quiet. Wasn't as concerned about those. The Ursa Mini Pro's fan's a little bit louder. And then we also had an Atomos recorder there that Carrie was using as a monitor. And eventually we had to turn that off too. It was just making too much noise. And then, of course, this is not a perfect studio. There is some, I think it's a couple points you'll be able to hear some traffic noise outside. So it's not perfectly soundproofed either. And there's not any, in this particular space, not any real acoustic treatment. There was a sound blanket maybe, I think, on the ceiling. But that was it. So in any case, some lessons learned there. So next times we would use fans without lights. We would probably go with the Pocket 4Ks in as much as possible, and I would not use the Ursa Mini Pro. Those are some thoughts there. So those are the biggest things. In the recordings that I am playing here is once I finally realized that the fans were interfering with the overall recording. That became very clear after the first bit. I changed them, in addition to getting rid of some of the fans, the Atomos recorder we turned that off and got rid of it. Carrie also used a cinema battery on the 300D, the big light, and that eliminated one of the fans for the light, which was good. But I also wanted to change the orientation of the microphones. And this particular orientation worked okay, but I think I actually liked the sound of the other one better, but that one just had too much fan noise in it. So I'll have to go back and do that again. But in any case, this is my first shot at it. I guess what I'm saying here is this is not a review of the microphones. By the way, Rode just sent those to me, full disclosure. They just showed up on my doorstep one day and they wrote a letter that said, basically, we hope you'll do something cool with these. So here's my first attempt at something cool. I think our next one's going to be a lot better. Here's some samples. So in short, get out there and start experimenting and learning. You can only learn through experience. You can learn taking advice from others, obviously, but when it really comes to it, I think the deepest learning comes when you perhaps do some research, but then you go out and do it yourself. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. Hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. Talk to you again next week.